When he got home that night, he was glad for another routine, quiet dinner, free of a lot of small talk, just like so many they'd endured over the past several months. He nervously reached for his wife's hand and said, "I've got something to tell you." As he observed the hurt in her eyes, he suddenly didn't know how to even open his mouth. But he had to let her know what he had been thinking. "I want a divorce." She didn't seem to be annoyed by his words, but instead asked softly, "Why?" He just avoided her question. Angry words began to well up in her throat. She threw down her fork and shouted, "You're not a man." He knew she wanted to find out what had happened to their marriage. He just didn't know how to convey a satisfactory answer. Truth was, he had allowed another woman to steal his heart. He didn't love her anymore. He just pitied her. Earlier that day, he drafted a divorce agreement which stated that she could own their house, their car, and 30% stake in his company. The thought of parting ways was more than she could bear right then. He felt sorry for all the time and energy she'd invested in their relationship, but he loved Jane so dearly. After looking it over briefly, she just tore it into pieces and ran out of the room. The woman who had spent 10 years of her life with him had become a stranger. The following night, he arrived home very late and found her writing something at the table. He hadn't eaten dinner, but after an exhausting and eventful day with Jane, he just walked straight upstairs and went to bed. He woke up in the middle of the night and wandered back downstairs. She was still there at the table, still writing. He had no idea what she was doing, but he just didn't care. So he went back to bed. In the morning, she presented her divorce conditions. Surprisingly, she didn't want anything from him. She just needed a month's notice before the divorce. She requested that during that 1 month, they both try to live life as normal as possible. Her reason was simple. Their son was already struggling in school, and she didn't want to further upset him with their broken marriage. This was agreeable to him, but she had something more. She asked him to recall how he'd carried her into their bridal suite on their wedding day. She requested that every morning for that entire month, he carry her from their bedroom clear to the front door. He thought her request was absurd, but just to make their last days together bearable, he decided to go along with it. The next morning, he was reluctant to tell Jane about his wife's divorce conditions. Although he didn't know exactly how she'd react, he decided it would be best to go ahead and tell her anyway. Sure enough, she thought the idea was crazy. In fact, she didn't like it at all. When he carried his wife down on the first morning, they both appeared clumsy. They hadn't had any physical contact since the night he told her he wanted a divorce. Their son was so happy to see Daddy holding Mommy in his arms. That burst of joy brought him a sense of pain as they journeyed from the hallway, down the stairs, to the front door. She whispered softly, "Please don't tell our son about the divorce." He agreed, then put her down and drove alone to the office. On the 5th day, it wasn't quite as awkward. He could smell the fragrance of her hair. He realized that he hadn't looked carefully at this woman for a long time. She wasn't young anymore. There were fine wrinkles on her face, and her hair was graying. Their marriage had taken its toll on her. The 10th day came and went. So did the 15th. He began to realize that their friendship was returning. But he wasn't about to tell Jane. It was becoming easier to lift and carry her out as the month went along. He thought perhaps the unique workout was making him stronger. On the 21st day, when he picked her up, he felt a sense of intimacy growing again. This was the woman who'd committed her heart and soul to him for the past 10 years. On the morning of the 28th day, she had a difficult time trying to pick out something to wear. She tried on several outfits, but couldn't find one that fit just right. All my clothes seemed to be so baggy. He suddenly realized that she'd grown thinner. That's the reason why it was getting easier to carry her down every day. Their son came in like clockwork and said, "Dad, it's time to carry Mommy out." To him, seeing his father carrying his mother out had become the highlight of each and every day. Her husband turned his face away because he was afraid he might change his mind during one of these final days. He then held her in his arms, walking from the bedroom, through the hallway, down the stairs. He held her body tightly in his arms, her arms draped around his neck softly and naturally. It was just like their wedding day. But her much lighter weight made him sad. On the last day, as he was holding her in his arms, time seemed to stand still. He looked at her lovingly and said, "I hadn't noticed that our lives lacked intimacy." And they found themselves in a tender embrace. He drove to the office as fast as he could. He was fearful that any delay might cause him to change his mind. He hurried into the office and headed directly to where Jane was working. As soon as she turned to greet him, he steadied himself and said, "I don't want the divorce anymore." She gave him an astonished look and then asked if he was feeling all right. With resolve, he continued on, "I am not going to divorce my wife. Our relationship is over, Jane. I still love her. I'm going to fight to win her love and trust back. I made a commitment to her till death do us part." She slapped him. "I'm sorry, Jane," he said as he turned and walked away. She was devastated. He never imagined that his selfish choices would create so much pain. He rushed out of the building and drove away. He stopped by a floral shop on the way home to pick up a bouquet of flowers for his wife. He knew this was going to be a big surprise. Showing his wife any type of affection had been a thing of the past, but he had decided in his heart to change that. As he walked out, he couldn't wait to see her. He arrived home with flowers in his hand and a smile on his face. He ran upstairs, only to find his wife dead. She'd been quietly fighting cancer for months now, but he was so entangled with Jane that he didn't even notice. She knew she was going to die, and she wanted to spare her husband from any negative reaction their son might have had toward him before she passed away. It wouldn't take long for the request he once found bizarre to make perfect sense. She wanted their son to always remember Dad as a loving, thoughtful, and caring husband. Marriage was never intended to be a casual alliance or a temporary experiment. It's a sacred covenant where two become one. Committed love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures all circumstances. true intimacy will not improve spontaneously. It must be cultivated. How is true happiness achieved? Become best friends. Serve each other joyfully. Love and respect each other mutually. A wonderful marriage is the hope of every husband and wife who will stay true to their marriage vows till death do us